why Russian drones are so deadly. This is your host, Liber, and before we start, let me explain what you're about to hear. When people in the West talk about drones, they often imagine something clean, precise, almost clinical. Screens, operators, coordinates, and here in Ukraine, some drones don't look like that. Here, a drone sounds more like a lawnmower in the sky. And when it gets close enough, it sounds like the last thing you might ever hear. My call sign is Liber. I'm a soldier in the unmanned systems forces of the armed forces of Ukraine. And today I want to talk about one drone platform that has changed how this war feels for millions of civilians and soldiers alike. The Shahed, or as Russia calls it now, Geran. Let's start simple. The Shahed 136 is a loitering munition, what many people call a kamikaze drone. There is gunshots in the distance from a machine gun. Anyway, it's designed to fly long distances, search for a target, and crash into it, and then explode on impact. It's quite simple. It's not fast, it's not elegant, it's not advanced in a way people imagine modern weapons. But it carries around 50 kilograms of explosives. And this is the part that most people don't fully grasp. This is big-ass flying bomb. And Iran initially designed that as the Shahed 136. Russia bought it, and then Russia learned how to build it themselves. And once they have learned that, they stopped just, copying. They started evolving that, adding tons of new features and components that exactly accommodate the realities of the war in Ukraine that they need to tackle. This is why today what flies over Ukrainian cities isn't really Shahed anymore. It's something else. A mass-produced, constantly modified weapon system built solely for one purpose. So first, exhaust everyone that is trying to stop it, and then hit all the targets you can for as cheap as possible. And my fellow EOD guys will understand what 50 kilograms of C4 can do to a residential block. This is deadly.
A drone was filmed flying directly into a large apartment building.
I have seen those drones hit targets close by, near myself, like the electricity distribution station in the villages that I lived in Donbass. Not on a screen, not in a report, in real life, close by. That is actually scary. And this is the reality for many Ukrainians, especially the ones living in Kyiv too. I'm gonna tell you, it's not pretty. When Geran hits, it doesn't just destroy a building, it basically folds it into a rubble, a very powerful explosion. So you watch those firefighters and medics run towards smoke that is still rising, and then a few hours later you hear the same sound again, because they don't just send one, they usually do a lot of double tapping. They literally send dozens, sometimes hundreds. I think the most was like 500 something during just one night, I think this autumn 2025. So this is what life under drone warfare looks like. It really takes out all of the infrastructure, all of the electricity that you have, and it becomes quite scary. Sitting here outside in the field, and quite likely there is a Shahed attack going on, and someone using a machine gun trying to shoot that.
Тупо летить гуде сюди. Я в ахуї. Вон він летить, єбать. Ахуєть. Просто летить за вугол. Ну висота десь метрів 400. Просто йобнутися, блядь. Де я нахуй живу? Чим я займаюсь в житті? Пизда. Сука, ще летять підараси.
here is the part that most people miss. This story isn't really about Iran, and it's not only about Russia. I think it's really all about being strong and having strong tools in the modern theater of warfare. And Russia, I think, mastered it. It's like a method of building a military capability in real time, very rapidly. Russia didn't invent Shahed from scratch. They just acquired a baseline system, a platform, localized the production, and then turned manufacturing into the live laboratory. Once factories were under domestic control, every combat engagement became a part of a continuous development cycle. What you're seeing is not a weapon program. It's a production feedback loop. Data comes back from the battlefield, the interception rates, electronic warfare effectiveness, navigational failures, defenders' response time, air defense saturation thresholds for the optimal and suboptimal routes. All of that data goes straight back into the next batch coming up the line. And this is how a simple platform becomes strategically effective. They do not follow some stupid instructions from the MOD, making each modification years to come into the real warfare. Turns out, enclosed, centralized, dictatorish system, you can just do things. I have studied a bit of modifications they did since 22, when this weapon system was first employed here in Ukraine, and I gotta tell you, the modifications are not random. They're quite smart. They follow a clear operational goals, like the survivability. First thing they did, they repainted all of the airframes into black for night launches. And then started experimenting with speed and altitude so that Ukrainian defenders would see less of those drones flying in. Then the navigation. So they integrated CRPA antennas such as Cometa combined with U-Block's GPS modules and mixed satellite navigation to resist jamming and spoofing. Actually, here in Ukraine, we rely a lot on spoofing to make Shaheds go in circles or even go back to the launch point. But for each measure, there is a countermeasure. And then the communications. So they added 4G modems and mesh-capable radios onto those drones. Sometimes they even used local SIM cards, like Ukrainian, Russian, American SIM cards, to extend the control and situational awareness overall. And actually, there are some Shaheds now that have cameras on them, so the operators can even manually control them to chase targets. I think this is a very big leap. And also, they have started launching tons of decoys and false targets to force defenders to spend expensive interceptors on cheap airframes before they adapted. And I think that soon enough, we will see mini Starlinks on Shaheds. Some of the experiments, they fail, some of them succeed, but the critical advantage is to the technical brilliance in here. It's iteration speed at industrial scale. And from analytical perspective, this is a model that Western defense planners and analysts, I think, should be studying very carefully. The allied nations, especially in Europe, should be learned directly from Ukrainian operators, engineers, and analysts at the moment, not later. Just because this is a very dangerous weapon system, but let alone the weapon itself and the destructive capability, I think it's more about the approach that Russians used to enable that mass production, fixed and modified, enhanced each and every time by the warfare feedback. So they have extremely short innovation cycle. And this is something that we all should learn and unfuck our military-industrial complex to be able to keep up with this. Maybe it's very cynical, but I must also admit that my country, Ukraine, is at the moment running a real-world test bed for how modern, low-cost, high-scale warfare works in practice, under the pressure of daily combat. It shows how a low-cost, civilian technology-based platforms can be turned into something, like a strategically disruptive through that kind of rapid feedback, mass production, and continuous adaptation, modifications, without waiting for long procurement cycles, perfect designs, whatever. And this system isn't designed to be perfect, it's just designed to be many, to overwhelm. Even if only 20% get through, each one still carries around 50 kilograms of explosives. And as I said, my fellow EOD guys definitely know what can 50 kilograms of C4 make to a residential block or to industrial facility. By the end of 2025, reported production levels of those drones reached slightly over 100 per day. Let that sink in. There is no NATO country today that can match that kind of drone production speed. Manufacturing happens deep inside Russia, in places like Alabuga, special economic zone, far from the front lines, far from most conventional strikes, around 6,000 kilometers from Ukraine. And investigative reporting and open source intelligence also pointed out that they use tons of foreign colonial labor. Specifically, they lure African women to come study there in the college and then force them to build those drones for free to destroy Ukraine. And African men, they come into Russia, also learn to go study in the college or something, but somehow they end up in meat wave assaults somewhere in Donetsk, always taken out by FPV drones or something. I must also admit that they have outsourced the component manufacturing, including parts sourced through Chinese supply lines, that's obvious, to sustain that kind of tempo of production. And this is really, what modern war production looks like. No secret labs, just globalized industry with civilian tech. Also, very uncomfortable truth. Almost anyone can build something like that. These drones are full of civilian, off-the-shelf components. And, the flight controllers you can buy online, the engine meant for land equipment, electronics from the United States, Europe, Japan, China, Switzerland. You can all look it up on the website, actually, by Ukrainian main Directorate of Intelligence that carefully analyzed all of the components in Shaheds. Sanctions struggle to stop this because this is not a single supply chain, it's a global market. And war is being built with the same tools that people use to build hobby drones and consumer electronics. In Europe and the United States, people talk about drone swarms and artificial intelligence. I hear and see that all the time in those defense hackathons. What flies over Ukraine is much simpler, but not that primitive. It's radio mesh built on basic modems and forward-facing cameras. In several documented cases, Geran have been fitted with 4G LTE kind of modems and low bandwidth data links that allows drones to talk to each other and relay telemetry and video, and then talk back to the operator that could sit somewhere in Belarus, which is close enough to Kyiv, and they are able to operate them from there. That's not a full autonomy, no, but that's a distributed control. So when you launch hundreds of those at once, even simple networked systems become operationally so powerful. And this turns cheap airframes into coordinated attack platform. And I think that this isn't just a Ukrainian problem. From an analytical standpoint, I built this little case study earlier and I'm sharing it with you now. I really want to highlight how those modern war fighting platforms are built, not just how they are used. So if a country can design a system where hundreds of those cheap, expandable drones are launched in the coordinated waves, that the traditional balance between attacker and defender changes fundamentally. So imagine 500 Shahed type of drones approaching a European capital in a single night. I'm ready to bet $100 that no European air defense system today is structured to absorb that level of pressure without being exhausted. Not because the technology doesn't exist or they don't want to fight smart, etc., but because, the economics of how they are prepared to fight at any moment doesn't scale. A single Shahed is often maybe $100,000 or even less. An interceptor missile from NASAMS or any advanced air defense engagement, costs you several times more per one shot, and you don't always hit it from the first hit. So this creates, I think, structural imbalance. For attacker, you don't really need to spend much. You can attack cheaply, and defenders spends a lot to defend. So that economic asymmetry really matters. It means that real battlefield is not only in the sky, but in the factories, supply chains, budget, and development timelines, but also in policies. Policies are so important. I think that's a decisive factor why Russia can do this. That kind of a quick feedback loop by bypassing all of the MOD checks. And this is why no European or American state could ever do that, because of bureaucracy that is no fit for active warfare. But it is up for discussion. For NATO and European analysts, I think the key question is not only how to stop this specific drone, the question is whether Western defense systems are structured to observe, adapt, and scale at the same time as an adversary. That treats war as a continuous engineering and production process. I think that's a boring sign, not really about this platform, but about the way of building military power in the age of globalized technology and mass production. And if you work in national security, government, or just in defense industry, and you want to dig deeper into this topic and how to counter this, just email me at dimko@zigaspo.com so we can discuss that in more details. I'm not just talking about this as an analyst. I'm talking about this as someone who lives under those drones, and as someone who works with people who take them down. There is a Ukrainian charity called Zigaspo. It's run by volunteers, and together they have crowdfunded and delivered over $5 million of US dollars worth of technological equipment to Ukraine's defense forces, including the units that shoot down those drones out of the skies to keep civilians safe. Right now, they're raising money for something that is very simple but critical for their mission. A van that could help them transport stuff, the equipment, and their personnel when they're operating in the battlefield environment. And the logistics, they win wars, and NGOs like that make huge impact here in Ukraine. I will leave a link down below for you to support their mission. But that's it for today. Freedom to you all. Stay frosty.